Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. All right, everybody. Chad Millman. I'm relishing in a rare winning week. I went 3-2. I've told you I've had an absolutely terrible year betting. I do think it's a little easier in the playoffs because you get greater quarterbacks, and I kind of know, especially at home, your better quarterbacks generally play pretty well at home. So that said, Kansas City minus 7.5. I know there's a hook. Warm weather team on the road after playing really well. CJ Stroud's home and away splits don't play in his favor. Andy Reid in a bye. Kansas City's going to win the game. The question is, by how much? So I'm inclined to say, oh, I had a winning week last week. I lost one of those underdogs that everybody loved, and that's what I did all year. So I do think the weakest team left in the playoffs, AFC or NFC, is not the Commanders, because I think their quarterback may be better than Andrew Luck as a rookie. It's probably Houston on the road in cold weather. So I know it's wrong, but I'm going to take the Chiefs minus 7.5. What say you?
Yeah, at 7.5, I think it's the sharp side. At 8.5, you're starting to get a little bit of interest in the Texans. And what you just said is exactly what the wise guys are seeing too. They're more interested in betting the Commanders, let's say, as big
Yeah.
underdogs than betting on the Texans right now. And there's one thing that you have to consider, which is Patrick Mahomes as a favorite of three or more generally has been a losing bet.
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes as a 7+ point favorite, 52-5 straight up. So
Yeah.
he generally wins those
They're going
games.
to win the game.
22, 32-3 against the spread. That's 41%. Normally, I will not give you the exact numbers. I'll just give you the percentage because I'm not going to give you anything that is a data set of two, right? I'm going to give you a sample size that is relevant so people understand we're not just sort of giving out really small numbers to make ourselves look good. 41% against the spread on a sample size that is 22 plus 32. What is that? 57, right? So that's a decent sized number at a point spread of 7+. So dig a little deeper because don't forget, this game is going to be played in very, very cold weather. Okay. Patrick Mahomes as a favorite of 7+ points in weather under 40 degrees, he's 10-6 against the spread. Under 30 degrees, he's 4-1 against the spread. So what did I just tell you? I just told you his record was 22-32-3 against
Yeah.
the spread as a 7+ point favorite. Nearly 50% of those wins against the spread have come in cold weather. So now all of a sudden it changes the formula a little bit, makes me feel more comfortable betting on the Chiefs. So the wise guys have been betting on the Chiefs. They bet this up. It's about 50-50 in terms of the feelings, the expectations on either side. At 8.5, I still like the Chiefs here.
Commanders plus 9.5 is the side to me. A side note, my favorite part, Detroit's going to win the game. But since they have a pocket quarterback and they don't have a hyper-mobile quarterback on the roster, the advantage here to playing against Jaden Daniels in this game is whoever they face next and in the Super Bowl is likely Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, or Josh Allen. So this is a really good test case on how they defend a running quarterback because they don't have one on their roster. So I think it's instructive. This is a really good game for Detroit. I think they'll win the game. Jaden Daniels, however, has been so good and so good late. Now, if it's a blowout, and that's certainly possible, we know one team's going to blow the other out. But the Commanders are the rare team in a rebuild that's actually great late. That's usually veteran teams and veteran staffs. Very rarely are you like the Chargers. You'd be surprised if they were great in close games because they have a new staff and kind of a new culture. I would take the points here. I think it's going to be a Detroit win. But if the Commanders get the opening snap, take it and score, I'm like, game on. 16.5 points. I'm okay with that. Sharp or square.
Well, there's no consensus here, and this is going to be a little bit of a theme today. The Lions have been so dominant against the spread during the Dan Campbell and Jared Goff era. When I say dominant, I mean their 3 and 4 year records against the spread are the best in the Super Bowl era. Jared Goff indoors, 34-13 against the spread. This is a team that doesn't matter what the number is. They cover the number. They're 18-2-1 against the spread against teams averaging more than 24 points per game. The Commanders average 28 points per game. There are pockets of professional bettors who like the Commanders for exactly what you just said. They have won their last 5 games on the last play of the game. I don't mean good comeback last 2 minutes. I mean literally last play of the game. If you break it down, you see, okay, well, that was against New Orleans and they kind of underperformed and needed a miracle to win at the end. The next one, that was against Philly. Jalen Hurts got hurt in the beginning of the game, and they needed a miracle to come back against a team that was a little bit banged up and didn't have its quarterback playing for them, right? The next game, Atlanta, and the coach, Raheem Morris, for the Falcons, screwed up the timeouts and took the Falcons out of position to win that game. And then they won in the last second play against Dallas in a game that didn't really matter. And then last week with some flukiness from the Baker Mayfield fumble and then the field goal kick in the upright. So you can look at it either way and say, yeah, they're great in the end, or yeah, they're getting lucky against inferior teams or getting fluky plays at the end. So you're 100% right in that if they score early, this is a game that you can expect to be a shootout, expect to go over the 55.5, and because 16.5 is a lot to cover when your defense for the Lions still isn't that great and is going to be playing against a very good running quarterback. But I can't give you like a strong opinion on the wise guys.
So my favorite pick last week was Philly against Green Bay to cover, and I didn't even think Philly played well, and they did it. I like this game, Philly -6 as well, for about 20 reasons. Number one, warm weather team that tends to perform very well on extra rest. Now it's short rest. Flight across the country in cold weather. Kyron Williams is hurt. They played a perfect football game largely against Minnesota. They did earlier this year against Buffalo. How'd they look the next week? Even in the professional ranks, you do not play perfect football back-to-back weeks. And when McVay has extra time, it's like watching, it's symphonic. I mean, their first play of the game's like, Puka, 27 yards. You're like, yep, it's going to be a rough one for the Vikings. Philadelphia at home, you can always coach a team more harshly when they win and play like crap. I think one of the strengths of the Eagles that had previous years been a weakness is corner. So Puka Nacua, this Rams team is very Puka-centric. They match up well with them. I also think the Rams' offensive line and pass protection can be very inconsistent. They have a rookie center, a 7th-round pick, 6th or 7th from Arkansas, against Jalen Carter, who is virtually unblockable. For 20 reasons, I like Philadelphia -6 to cover, sharp or square.
Yeah, totally sharp. I think you're finding real consensus here for a lot of the reasons you just said. And if you look at that game last week, in reality, it probably should have ended 29-10. Saquon took a dive to end the game and at 22-10. But everything you're saying, and from front to back, even without Nakobe Dean, this Eagles defense is so fierce. And what they did to the Packers in making them look bad is the opposite of what the Vikings did to Matthew Stafford. And that offensive line that the Vikings had made the Rams defense look like the Eagles.
Right.
The Rams defense is not the Eagles. And the Eagles offensive line is not the Vikings offensive line. This is a team that is so completely dominant at the line of scrimmage on both sides The wise guys are wondering why this isn't a little bit higher, and they'd bet it up to 7. To be honest, if you look back to when these teams played
It was
earlier in the
dominant.
fall,
Eagles totally dominated the second half.
destroyed them. The line in that game was 3. Okay. The Eagles were favored by 3. Now the Eagles are favored by 6. Even if you say, okay, I'm discounting the home field advantage for the Rams and it's really not worth that much. And then you translate all that, like home field is usually worth 3, right? So in reality, what the bookmakers would be thinking is, well, shouldn't the Eagles be favored by 9, right? Because they're 3 on the road, at a neutral field, they're 6, at home, they're 9. Say that the Rams at home is not worth anything. It still isn't worth 0. So there's a little bit of value here. This line should probably be 7. I would not be surprised if it gets there. Wise guys will definitely be betting it at 6.
So I like the Bills plus 1.5 at home. Zay Flowers is the only Ravens player who has not practiced. In fact, it's been a while since he did practice. So if he plays, he'll be, this is kind of walking on the field and going. I understand the Bills' run game. The Bills' defense is susceptible to the run game, and I don't doubt that Baltimore will have some success. Whether they have success in the red zone, we'll see. And there have been teams that beat the Bills. The Rams played a perfect football game. But this Buffalo team, really, between an elite offensive play caller, left tackle, quarterback, running back, I really like their wide receiving and tight end group. You may not have a superstar, but it's B plus stuff. I think, there's a sense that Lamar gets tense in big games. Lamar also doesn't like cold weather, and it's going to be 24 degrees. I don't get the line. Getting Josh Allen's best team at home plus points, I don't know what the analytics say. It just feels wrong. I think the Bills are going to win the Super Bowl. So,
Wow.
yeah, so I'm taking Buffalo here, sharp or square.
So the line opened Ravens plus 2, and it moved very quickly with wise guy money to Ravens minus 1. It was less than 24 hours before the Ravens went from underdogs to favorites. It got up to 1.5. The wise guys have started buying the Bills back from 1.5. It's down to 1 in a lot of places. Like the wise guys like generally whoever the underdog is in this matchup. That's
Yeah.
what they're betting. So if you like the Bills, you can get him as an underdog. Get him as an underdog. I would not. I don't like either side in this game. If I have to bet, I'm going to wait as long as I can. Try to get the Ravens at pick and hope that this line comes back down. As much as Lamar doesn't like playing in the cold, he still has succeeded. He's 4-0 in games when it's, less than when it's 30 degrees or less. He's 26-9 against the spread as a favorite of 3 or less, or as an underdog. I get what Josh Allen is. I think Lamar Jackson is the MVP. This is a more well-rounded team. I think you're playing with fire if you're betting the Bills. But the wise guys are liking him as an underdog. But there's also plenty of wise guys who still like the Ravens to win this game.
So whether it's young fighters or young football teams, there is something about youth that confidence can ebb and flow based on your most recent date, success, fight, game. Ohio State's in this, I don't know if vortex is the right space, but they are on fire. Their self belief is unbelievable. They are making good teams look awful. They made Oregon look like a third tier team. They humiliated physically Tennessee, and I mean, again, Texas was arguably for most of the year everybody's sort of belief until they lost to Georgia for the second time. Texas was the team, and you watch them line up with Ohio State, and you're like, yeah, NIL money. You can see who spent the most money. It's Ohio State. I also think Chip Kelly has given Ohio State an advantage in the NIL and NFL playoff like tournament, where It's a great team after great team after great team. You hide some stuff. You unveil some stuff later. I think what they've done to their offense, the pacing, the tempo, delivering kind of new sets and looks. I think it's a really smart football team, and this is the first time in college football you've had an NFL-style playoff, and I think Chip Kelly has helped. Notre Dame has one five-star athlete. I do think the game will be close in the first half because I think Marcus Freeman is my Sean McVay in college. I think culture and belief. But, Sean McVay in his career has lost when he has faced better teams, when he faced the Niners for years, when all these when Shanahan's players were all in their prime, he had great
Yeah.
game plans. And by the third quarter late, you're like, San Francisco's got better players. I I love Marcus Freeman. I think they're outmanned here. I think it's a very competitive, low scoring game early. I don't think it is late. I'll take the Buckeyes minus 8.5 sharp or square.
Well, at this point, there's no real dominance on either side, right? The line opened at 9.5, got bet down to 8.5. It's kind of in that no man's land between 7 and 10. The real interest from professional bettors is on the under right now in this game. I think it's at 45.5 right now. These defenses, as much as the Buckeyes offense is so good, Notre Dame's defense has been phenomenal, and Al Golden has been creating incredible game plans. And if you look at sort of every single metric, they're just about even. Either one is number one at one and the other one is number five, or vice versa. The only real differences are Ohio State is not nearly as good at stopping teams on third down, and Ohio State's not nearly as good at converting turnovers as a defensive team. But on the flip side, Notre Dame has things where they're not as good. So they're not as good at getting sacks as Ohio State. So there's definitely, this game feels like a defensive battle, and the wise guys are looking at the under. There's a lot of data to back up what you like about this. There have been 24 national title games in the BCS era.
Yeah. Favorites
12,
crush.
12 of those have been won by the favorites by more than a touchdown. So if you do like Ohio State, it is likely they will cover this game. So if you're thinking that they're going to win, bet them to cover, because that's usually how those things go with the favorites in a national title game for college football.
I will tell you though, it's funny about college football. There are some suggesting that the SEC's run is over, and then others are saying it's a one-off. But there is some advantage to this. If the NIL never has a cap, schools like Alabama are begging boosters like it's a bake sale to give money. Notre Dame's got more money than SEC schools outside of Texas. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, a lot of these Oregon, a lot of these northern tier teams, there's a lot of CEOs from those schools, and there's a lot of money in the North. And when Alabama is basically saying, we need help, $100, $50 will help. That's a car wash. That's a plea for help. And you're getting that from some of the sort of SEC fan bases, which is one of the great things about the SEC has been the tribal nature of it. The Big Ten, although there is some parochialism to it, Big Ten graduates go to the coast and they make big money. SEC graduates largely stay in the footprint of the South to a large degree. Big Ten graduates, they go to LA, San Francisco, Seattle, tech jobs, Boston, Minneapolis, New York, DC, overseas, and they make great money. And I just look at like Notre Dame. I'm like, I know like 6 Notre Dame guys. They're all rolling in it. They're all doing well. So I think there's something to be said about, there are some financial realities. And this is not to say there's not money in the South. Georgia's got a lot of money. But when Alabama's coming out and begging for it, it's like, wow. And Alabama is sort of the Bentley, it's sort of the standard of the South. I do think SEC will still be the deepest conference for a while. But remember this year, Washington was in a rebuild. USC was in a rebuild. Michigan was in a rebuild. They're not in rebuilds next year. And Penn State brings everybody back. And Ohio State's Ohio State. And Oregon, with their money, is Oregon. I think it's inches, not feet now. I think these conferences are going to go toe to toe. Ohio State. I mean, we don't even count Oregon because they got blown out by Ohio State. I think Oregon would have beaten everybody except Georgia in the SEC.
I'm so glad you brought this up. I saw that same story about Alabama, and I wasn't shocked at all to see that they were having a hard time with NIL money. And granted, everyone should take this with a grain of salt. We're two East Coast, West Coast media
Right.
dudes
Yeah.
who have not spent an extraordinary amount of time living in the South. But I think your theory and your thesis is spot on, and we're seeing it in different ways.
Yeah.
I don't think of the University of Miami as a Southern school. The University of Miami is a school where a lot of people with a lot of money from the East Coast, from really wealthy communities in the Midwest, send their kids to school. And those kids then go out. Maybe they live in Miami, but they usually go back to their hometown, whether it's New York or Chicago, and they end up working in huge corporate environments, making a ton of money. They can funnel a lot of money in NIL for Miami, where Carson Beck is going, right? Think about Duke, Duke in basketball. Duke has some of the wealthiest alumni in the country. How did Duke get money so quickly for NIL? Partially because their program is amazing and that's where they're going to focus, but they're getting NIL money for football too. And so I think you're 100% right. NIL is going to even the scales a little bit. And it's not going to be one of those things where, oh my God, Alabama's going to get so much better. They didn't get so much better. And now we're seeing what's happening. It's teams that have huge alumni networks that
Yeah.
are going to get so much
Right.
better.
And
I
think
agree
and th
100%.
and think about this. I don't think people realize this. Big Ten schools are much bigger than SEC schools. Wisconsin, 40,000. Ohio State, 45,000. I mean, if you're listening to this, go look it up. Big Ten schools often have double the kids, and they spread out over the country or internationally. I know a lot of SEC kids that do go to New York City. I'm not saying they don't, but the South is people that live in the South and go to college in the South love the South.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that have gone to Michigan, but it's too cold and they can't wait to get back to LA or Miami. And so I just think the reality is if it's not a knock on the South, it's a reality of it. They're just, in many instances, smaller universities with smaller student bodies. They fill their stadiums. Um, but man, you start looking at how big Penn State is and Ohio State and Wisconsin. Whereas the South, economically, there's a lot of jobs. The South is still growing. The Midwest isn't necessarily growing and has bad weather. So a lot of Big Ten students flee to better weather. Whereas a lot of SEC students say, like, listen, I like the winters down here. I love Atlanta, my friends, my family. So and this is just anecdotal, but in my life, the one city SEC school, the one city SEC students go to outside of the South is New York City. A lot of financial majors,
Yep.
economy majors, accounting majors, or whatever. But I do think that the fact that the South, the economy is pretty good in the South. Cities like Nashville are fun, cool, and growing. Atlanta, same thing. Not a lot of places outside of Chicago in the Midwest are economic powers. I mean, a lot of Indies and St. Louis and so a lot of Big Ten kids, they flee after they graduate. Detroit, a lot of these kids, they want to go to school there. They don't want to live there.
I think, well, number one, let me tell you that Penn State student body, I think it's close to 60, 70,000 people. Like it is a
Yeah.
massive student body, right? It is much, much bigger than when you're going to get in an SEC school. Don't disagree with you at all about kids wanting to go to the SEC schools and then leaving the SEC schools, right? I'm going through it right now. It is so hard to get into SEC schools. Georgia, Auburn, Florida. Those are some of the most competitive state schools in the country right now. I'm seeing it. And partially it is because kids from the Northeast, like my kid, kids from the Midwest,
They're tired of
they're,
the weather.
they're tired of the weather and they're seeing it on social media every single
And the
image
girls
in
are
their feed
beautiful, and
is
it's you're everybody's wearing sundresses all year.
everyone's going to football games, having the time of their life, partying in the Grove. And they're like, why would I want to go to somewhere where it's gray 8 months
Listen,
out of the year?
of the top 23 school enrollments, 13 are in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's almost the whole Big Ten.
yeah. So, remember, USC's private, they're Big Ten now. Northwestern's private, they're Big
Yep.
Ten. So of the 16, two of them are private, small privates. Now, Vanderbilt's also private, so I'm sure their enrollment's smaller. Privates usually are. But no, I think our points are valid. That listen, if you grow up in warm weather, it is hard to go cold. If you grow up in cold weather, it's much easier to go warm.
Yeah. This is it'll be fascinating to see how this develops over the next 5 years, right? Or even longer, because we are seeing so many kids from the East Coast and the Midwest who are going to these SEC schools. And over, say, a generation from now, as these kids maybe decide to stay in the Southeast, is there more money in corporate culture? Is there more NIL money that gets funneled into these SEC schools that otherwise would have gone to a Michigan, that would have gone to an Ohio State, that would have gone to a Penn State? Because those were the places where those kids were going and they're no longer headed there. And so there's a lot more corporate money that can flow into the SEC schools, to your point from earlier. But it might take a while.
Right. So listen, all I know is here's something else that jumped out to me before we go is that I always love kind of where sports is going, not just where it is. And so college football, I think, between transfer portal, NIL, and playoff has made a lot of changes. And I tend to love change in sports and where it's going. I think college football is in a really cool place. It just needs some guardrails on the NIL and transfer portal. And I think the 12-team playoff will become 14 or 16. But did you see last couple of days it was announced that Caitlin Clark's Indiana Fever are spending $90 million
Yeah.
on a new arena? And so there's something about the WNBA. It's a league that got very defensive when you suggested that Caitlin Clark was driving a lot of their ratings growth, almost all of it. What does it tell you that a WNBA team, this is a league that hasn't made a profit, is spending $90 million in Indiana on a basketball arena, and it's the right move the year after Caitlin Clark arrives? If you don't think she has economic superpowers, you're not paying attention. That is nothing against any other WNBA player. The league is better. She is a supernova. She is a comet.
Why would anyone ever get defensive about saying when someone says that their success is defined by this singular moment, this singular person? Did the NBA and the Bulls really suffer because Michael Jordan came out of nowhere and took the mantle from Larry Bird and Dr. J and turned the Bulls into a global franchise? Are the owners of the Warriors thinking to themselves, man, it was so much more fun before Steph Curry when our franchise was worth about $350 million instead of the $7 billion it's worth today with our brand new arena? The Indiana Fever, the Warriors with their arena, they're doing exactly the right thing. They're taking advantage of the moment in time when they have everybody's interest, can funnel a lot of revenue into new projects and get attention for it. And then all of a sudden, it makes everything they're doing more valuable down the line. They're using Caitlin Clark to build a generationally great franchise and help the league grow because there is so much interest in women's sports right now. It's a brilliant, brilliant idea.
By the way, I had Adam Silver on for kind of a wide-ranging 30-minute interview this week. He was really,
Yes,
really
I
good.
know.
He's really good. And most of what he says, I gave him a platform for it, and I agree with it. But I got into this thing where he said it, and I thought about it, and I was driving into work today. Is that he And I think the league is saying, listen, we've had 6 champs in 6 years. And I think what has happened, we're a much more distracted nation. A lot of it is we're on our phones more than we watch TV. And that it's hard to get us to watch stuff that's not special. You have so many platforms, so many streamers, so many networks, so many cable channels, so many subscriptions to so many different platforms that to get me to watch something, and I'm a sportscaster, there's got to be a special. A UFC fight on a Saturday is special. College football playoff special. World Cup special. Olympic special. NFL once a week special. Caitlin Clark games occasionally special. Otani playoff games special. All of those that I just mentioned were rewarded this year with big ratings. I think hockey, most of baseball, and the NBA in volume sports, I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for the rest of my lifetime to get ratings in the regular season unless you create special. This is what Fox did to baseball. They said, how about a game in a cornfield? How about Mets Phillies in Europe? You need more special events. We're becoming an event society. And the dynasties feel special. When Kevin Durant went to the Warriors, though it felt lopsided, their games were events. Shaq and Kobe, events. The problem in the NBA now is the events are maybe the finals. A Knicks Celtic Eastern Conference final would feel like an event. But when you combine load management, where many stars miss big games with the new reality of a distracted populace, I think baseball, hockey, and the NBA are going to struggle in the regular seasons going forward.
Well, the NBA is trying to fix that, right? With
NBA Cup.
the midseason tournament and the NBA Cup, trying to make something that feels more like an event. And to me, those games are a little bit more intense. I love the NBA. I love NBA playoffs. You talk
Yeah.
about Knicks, Celtics, Eastern
Yeah.
Conference Finals. That is must-see TV.
Oh
The
yeah.
intensity level, the level of defense, and I think obviously, and I know Adam talked about this with you on the show and the three-point shooting. Like there is a level of intensity that is missing from the regular season, and trying to create that with the NBA Cup is one way to do it, but it's also hard when you don't have a dynasty. And I am a massive, massive fan of dynasties. I want
Yeah.
sports dominance. I want to see history. I want to see teams do it again and again and again. And I want to see them annihilate their opponents. And I want to see them do things that can be compared in history, not just on a season to season basis. And it's getting harder and harder to do that with the NBA. And also, look, the best athletes, Anthony Edwards, Victor Wembanyama, they are Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. They
Yeah.
are so much fun to watch. Only one of them really has anything close to the charisma of a Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Anthony Edwards, of a LeBron
Yeah.
James. Anthony Edwards, but he's still growing up, and like he's not connecting with the fans in the same way
Yeah.
that these guys did, right? There's something that isn't translating for fans, even though I think he's phenomenal and he's so
Yeah.
much fun. Um, that's the challenge, is they need dominance right now. And the Celtics, they're not dominant. Jason Tatum isn't a guy that fans
No.
are getting behind. Jaylen
See,
Brown is not
again,
a guy
the word,
fans get
the
behind.
word, the word special. The Celtics won the title because they had the greatest depth. One through
Yeah.
eight, they were easily the best team in the league. Tatum was disappointing in big games. In fact, Jaylen Brown was getting the MVP. So even on that team, like Shaq and Kobe both felt generational. Brown and Tatum feel really good. So our championship team now, even on Cleveland, Donovan Mitchell's very good. We don't think he's Jordan or Kobe or LeBron or Steph. And so right now, Luka is great, but his game isn't flashy. It's like Dirk. It's not a flashy game. So, and it's not a criticism. Like, I like the NBA a lot. I mean, I've said before. I'll give you this question. You get five things in sports, everything else leaves. So mine would be NFL, college football, sports gambling, NBA playoffs. Ah, shit. UFC. You can't count World Cup and the Olympics. Those are every 4 years. You have to go through all of sports. You get to keep 5 things: NFL, college football, gambling, NBA playoffs, UFC. I like the World Cup a lot too. What would your 5 be? What would you get rid of? What would your 5 be? And I say this, I loved the baseball playoffs.
Yeah.
I loved it this year, especially in the National League.
I would add World Series. I would take off UFC because I love playoff baseball. It is so intense. It is every pitch, and it's the same context we're just talking about. During the season, I'm not going to watch that many baseball games. I'm going to keep track of what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm a stat geek, so I love reading about how teams are performing and how certain players are developing. But I'm not going to watch a mid-season game with the same intensity and the same joy that I'm watching a World Series game. Even the past World Series that was essentially a blowout, that last game was so intense and you couldn't turn it off no matter how late it was going to go. I feel the same way about the NBA playoffs. I would not get rid of anything for the NBA. I love the NBA all year round. I'm going to watch the Thunder and the Cavs. And even though nobody knows who any of those players are, I love the game of basketball that they're all playing, and the way they pass amongst themselves, I think, is amazing. Obviously, I'm not going to get rid of sports betting. That to me has to be number one. Sports
Yeah.
betting, sports betting is the invisible hand influencing the current and future state of sports, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah.
And so that to me is the umbrella that all of this lives under. The NFL, I wouldn't get rid of a second of the NFL. I cannot live without it. I love it so much. And college football, here's my problem with college football. The games are just too long.
Yeah,
Like I don't need 4.5 hours of college football games. And I think they're great. They're fun, but I can't sit for that long. So if it's going to stay, I need it to get shorter.
The NFL is king and so much greater than college football is because it has a commissioner and it's constantly tweaking. It's the same reason UFC is better than boxing. It has a central voice and is constantly tweaking. Is that college football is like a really good product, poorly run. I mean, essentially the 12-team playoff happened and Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC and the Pac-12 folding and 4 teams moving into the Big Ten, all that happened because Fox and ESPN wanted it to happen.
Yeah,
that's
totally.
it. They just got tired of college football wasting so many monetization opportunities that Fox and ESPN said, guys, we're going to take it over. Boom.
Yeah.
And that's what Dana White said. Boxing, you're ridiculous. I'm going to create something, the Fertitta family and Dana White. And so college football and boxing, which I loved growing up, have just been poorly managed my entire life. And so Dana White and TV networks changed both, and for the better. I mean, college football now, like a 12-team playoff. You're like, what? Why aren't we? And it's not even done. They're going to keep tweaking it. But why didn't this happen 25, 30 years ago?
It's interesting the way you talk about UFC because I know the sport well. I wrote Chuck Liddell's autobiography with him, and I've watched more UFC fights than I can count. I would still take a heavyweight boxing match over UFC with the pomp and circumstance any day. Like Lennox Lewis, Evander Holyfield, Tyson, Evander
I
Holyfield.
used to be like that. And Dana White, I asked Dana about that because Dana grew up with boxing and so did I. I used to be like that. And I still love a great boxing match, but they're so infrequent now. There's like one every other year. I mean, you got, Logan Paul is like one of the attractions. Hey, let's put Conor McGregor in boxing gloves.
Yeah, it's gimmicky now. It's not the same thing, but I'm saying historically, if I could have back a brilliant heavyweight boxer, or if I could even have Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao in their prime, I would rather have that than UFC. It's just more interesting to me. I just like it more. I'm not anti-UFC, but if I could have boxing at its height, I would take boxing at its height over UFC at its height.
Yeah, I used to be like that. I'm not anymore. And I also think, I mean, I'm in the UFC business at the volume.
Yeah.
And the one thing I think UFC is so brilliant. They picked a day, it's Saturday night, you know what you're getting. You don't get bad cards. You get either sensational cards or good cards. Boxing was a coin flip, whether you were pissed off at the end of the night for buying the pay per view and
Yeah,
saw
no.
nothing for 3 hours. And by the way, and then the fight would start an hour and a half late. It was like watching Guns N' Roses going to a concert. They're going to hit the stage 2 hours late. Just smoke another bowl and enjoy your night.
Dude, I remember getting together with my buddies in high school, and one guy would buy the Tyson fight, and we'd
Yeah.
be all sitting around, we'd be jacked. We're like, this is what we're doing tonight. It's going to be amazing. We don't have to go look for a party. We were such losers. We weren't going to find a party anyways. You're like, this is it. We're in. We're doing this tonight. And then Tyson would knock the guy out in 30 seconds. We're like, oh, fuck, what do we do now? We'd get in some guy's minivan, cruise around town, listening to the Smiths, and hoping we can find something to do.
Chad Millman, Sharper Square. All odds provided by DraftKings. He's a co host at The Favorites. Good seeing you, buddy.
Good to see you too, brother. Have a great weekend.